Welcome, adventurers. Today on Rebel Then King, we are beginning a new video series. We are going to compare and contrast two classes, not necessarily to decide a winner or loser, but just to get a better understanding of the mechanics, of the roleplay, kind of what makes these classes tick. And we are going to begin with two of the quintessential magic classes in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the Sorcerer and the Wizard. They do sort of feel like two very diametrically opposed classes. You have the Sorcerer, who is totally born with it. Everything is natural. And then you have the Wizard, who learned it all from the books. So let's understand the strengths and weaknesses and why you might want to play one of these classes. Also, we'll explain once and maybe for all who can cast more spells and why. If you think you know, leave a comment below. I think in order to begin comparing and contrasting these two classes, we have to talk about the difference between spontaneous and prepared spellcasting. You see, the Sorcerer is sort of the de facto spontaneous representation, and the Wizard is somewhat of the de facto prepared representation. So what does that mean, especially if you are new to the system? Let's explain. Let's begin with spontaneous casting because it's maybe a little bit easier to explain. As a level 1 sorcerer, you will have 3 spell slots for 3 spells that you can cast. You will also know 3 spells, and you can cast those 3 spells in any combination you'd like. So let's say you know Magic Missile, Runic Weapon, and Breathe Fire. Well, you can cast Magic Missile all 3 times, or Magic Missile twice and Runic Weapon 1 time. It's that easy. As a prepared caster, you will actually know more spells, but the way you fill your spell slots is different. So as a wizard, you're going to know 6 total spells. You will still have 3 spell slots. We'll explain some of this a little bit later, but you have 3 spell slots, and then you've got those 6 total spells, and you can decide which spells to put in each spell slot, as well as how many times. So if you wanted to cast Magic Missile 3 times as a prepared caster, you need to prepare it in all 3 of those slots. If you wanted to do Magic Missile twice and Breathe Fire once in that Sorcerer example, you would do Magic Missile in 2 slots and then Breathe Fire in that 3rd slot. And as a prepared caster, this can leave you being a bit, well, stuck. I've encountered this playing as a wizard. I had a bunch of spells prepared that all had the mental trait that affected the mind, and then we played against a bunch of mindless creatures, and I simply could not put those spells to use in that day. So given that explanation and that example, you are probably thinking spontaneous sounds way better, right? I'd say not so fast. It may be easier, I will definitely say that, but there are some advantages that go to the wizard, because the wizard knows more total spells. Wizards learn 5 level 1 spells as a level 1 character, or rank 1 spells, I should say, plus 1 from their curriculum for most wizards, and they can combine these in their spell preparation every day. They store these spells in their spell book. Meanwhile, the sorcerer will only know 3 total spells. That's 2 that they choose and 1 from their bloodline as part of their spell repertoire. So the wizard knows 6 total spells compared to the sorcerer's 3. There is also a difference in the cantrip count, as a wizard will learn 10 total cantrips plus 1 from their curriculum, compared to the sorcerer's 4 plus 1 from their bloodline. That's a difference of 11 cantrips for the wizard and only 5 total for the sorcerer. Ultimately, what I think this means is that as a sorcerer, you are better at adapting mid-day. But as a wizard, you are better at adapting day to day. What if you know you're going into a fiery realm and you can expect to encounter a lot of creatures with a fire resistance? Well, if you are a sorcerer and you have only fire spells, there's not really much you can do. You can't prepare differently. But as a wizard, you might say, well, I have a couple fire spells and a couple others, and so I'm not going to prepare Breathe Fire, and I'm going to take Snowball instead. I think another thing that helps the wizard out just a bit is their relative easier way to learn new spells. A sorcerer can technically learn new spells, but only by throwing out old spells in a swap kind of a maneuver. Specifically for the sorcerer, each time you gain a level and learn new spells, you can swap out one of your old spells for a different spell of the same level. So you have to throw out an old spell in order to bring in a new one as a sorcerer. But as a wizard, you simply learn new spells without throwing out the old ones. Specifically, each time you gain a level, you add 2 more arcane spells to your spell book of any level for which you have spell slots. Additionally, you can use the Arcana skill to add other spells that you find in your adventures. This uses the standard Learn a Spell rules. So potentially, a wizard can use downtime to really prepare for an upcoming adventure without having to sacrifice their previous learnings, and I think that is pretty cool. Though I should also mention the way that both of these classes do have access to scrolls, wands, and staves. That is a great way for the sorcerer, who might not be able to pick up new spells as easily, to essentially, pick up new spells. They can buy scrolls. They can get wands, they can even get a staff, and that will grant them access to additional spells as long as it's of the same spell list that they have, the same spell tradition. So that is sort of a way that catches the sorcerer up to the wizard a bit in terms of being able to prepare. They just have to pay for it. Well, those are the differences in the way that the two classes use their highest, most powerful types of spells from spell slots. What about their medium level spells, their focus spells? If you're new to the system, a focus spell is a type of sort of medium powered spell that you can only cast when you have a focus point. You begin with 1 focus point, and you can regain that focus point by focusing for 10 minutes. This means, at least to me, that focus spells are sort of your once per encounter spell. You use it, you lose that focus point. After the encounter is over, you focus for 10 minutes, and then you gain the ability to cast that spell again. At level 1, both wizards and sorcerers will gain a focus spell. Minor correction. In the upcoming section, I say will gain another focus spell. It's actually can gain with the class feat for both classes, but the numbers of spells is still correct. And wizards will gain another one as they level up. However, sorcerers will gain 2 additional focus spells. I should also mention, as you gain more focus spells, you gain more focus points. So at higher levels, a wizard will have 2 focus spells and 2 focus points, unless they gain focus spells through an archetype or something. But the sorcerer is going to have 3. So if you're keeping score, which I'm really not, but if you are, I'd say that is a point to the sorcerer. And now we've worked our way down to cantrips, which are sort of the lowest level of spells. They're not as powerful as the others, but there are no limitations on the number of times that you can cast them. A sorcerer is going to know 5 total, that is 4 that they get to pick, and then 1 from their bloodline, whereas a wizard will learn 11 total, that is 10 that they get to pick, plus 1 from their curriculum. That sorcerer is going to be able to use all 5 of those cantrips in a day, whereas the wizard will be able to use 6 in a day. They will be able to prepare 5, and they will always have 1 slot for that 1 curriculum cantrip that they have access to. So that is another point to the wizard, I would say, if you are keeping score, which I'm not, but maybe you are. One thing I should talk about real quick, which I kind of glossed over earlier and has come back up again in cantrips, is I'm talking about most wizards here. There is actually a subclass or a curriculum or school. It used to be called the Universalist, and now it's the School of Unified Magic Theory, I think, under the remaster, that does not actually gain an extra spell slot for the level spells, nor does it gain an extra slot for a cantrip. So that is something to keep in mind. They do get to use Drain Bonded Item more often, and we will talk about Drain Bonded Item a little bit later. We're not done talking about the way that these classes are magical, because they do each have some additional magic abilities. Sorcerers have something called blood magic. It's sort of a temporary effect that you gain whenever you cast either your focus spell or a spell from a spell slot, as long as it was a spell granted to you by your bloodline. And to be honest, I don't always find these super helpful, but some are pretty cool. You can deal a little bit of additional damage to an enemy, or a little bit of extra healing to an ally, or gain a temporary buff or boost to a skill check, like an intimidation check. It also is just really, really good for roleplay, because you can just imagine this sorcerer who just casts a spell, and sort of the latent energy is just going through their veins and coming out of their skin, and they're just bristling with energy and magic, and it just really evokes the kind of classic image that I'll think a lot of people have in their head of this person who is just magical by birth. Meanwhile, a wizard has something called an arcane thesis. This was their thesis, the thing that they chose to specialize in while studying magic. You can pick up a spell shape feat, or gain access to a familiar or a specialty staff, and you can even sort of modify the way that you prepare spells within Arcane Thesis so that you're a little bit less stuck with the very strict rules of typical prepared spellcasting. And although each class does offer an additional cool magic trick of some sort, I do have to say, I'm going to pause for dramatic effect. I have to say, I feel like blood magic is the number one most forgotten feature in all of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, or at least the most underused. I have listened to entire podcasts, multiple, with sorcerer characters who don't use their blood magic once. I've played along sorcerers who don't use their blood magic once, or very rarely. So I have to ask, if you're not using a feat, does that feat really matter? Maybe I should say feature and not feat, because it's not a class feat, but you know what I mean. Does it really matter that sorcerers have blood magic if someone is not making use of it? I would argue no, and maybe this is just a problem for some of the players that I have played alongside or seen, but I do think overall, given its sort of underuse, I would give this point, if I was giving points, which I'm not, to the wizard. And now finally onto the meaty controversy of the sorcerer versus the wizard. Who can cast more spells? If you just take a look at the spells per day tables, it looks obvious, the sorcerer. But I think a lot of people are missing this text when reading about the wizard. At first level, you can prepare up to 2 first-rank spells and 5 cantrips each morning from the spells in your spellbook. See below, referring to the table. As well as 1 extra curriculum cantrip and 1 extra curriculum spell of each rank you can cast from your arcane school. Additionally, the wizard has access to something called Drain Bonded Item, which allows them to recast a single spell once a day. And if you are a Universalist wizard, which we talked about earlier, you actually get to use Drain Bonded Item once per spell rank every day. By comparing a level 5 wizard to a level 5 sorcerer, we can see who can cast more spells in any given day. That wizard will have 4 rank 1 spells, that is 3 from the table, 1 from their curriculum. 4 rank 2 spells, 3 from the table, 1 from their curriculum. 3 rank 3 spells, 2 from the table, 1 from their curriculum. Plus an extra casting from Drain Bonded Item. That is 4 plus 4 plus 3 plus 1, and that is 12 total spells in the day. A sorcerer at that same level, the math is a little bit easier. It is 4 rank 1 spell slots, 4 rank 2 spell slots, 3 rank 3 spell slots. That is 11 total. So yes, the wizard does cast more spells than the sorcerer in a day. And that is definitely a point. I'm going to give a point this time to the wizard. So who is better? I think it's impossible to objectively say. The wizard has more daily cantrips and technically more daily spells, though that is really minimized at later levels. The Sorcerer has more focus spells as you level up and has incredible midday flexibility, whereas the Wizard maybe has a little bit more day-to-day flexibility. The Sorcerer can get stuck not being able to prepare for the next day, but the Wizard can get stuck with spells that they can't use in any given day. Sorcerer has Blood Magic, which goes underused but is actually pretty decent, and the Wizards have Arcane Thesis, so it's really tough to say. I do think that the spontaneous nature of the Sorcerer is really hard to contend with. They have lots of spells, and they get to use them any way they would like. I really have been stuck with my prepared spells as a wizard sometimes. It can really be tough. But I do also enjoy being able to prepare for an adventuring day, or even prepare for a side quest or campaign by learning new spells with my wizard, and that one extra cantrip per day is surprisingly helpful. It allows me to always prepare 3 sort of battle-focused cantrips and 3 exploration-based cantrips every single day. Each class also has really, really great roleplay. Do you want to be born with it? Or do you want to work really hard for it? Both are very, very valid options and offer a lot of potential for character backstory. The bottom line is that both the Sorcerer and the Wizard are great magical classes in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I would say they are sort of the de facto magical classes because they really mostly just offer magic without something else necessarily. The Bard is sort of magic plus martial plus buffing. It's not quite as focused on magic. The Cleric is magic, but a lot of healing. It's not quite as focused on magic. These two are just sort of pure magic through and through. The Sorcerer is easier to play, I would say, no doubt. I do think that this class does a great job of hitting a very, very sweet spot in the ease to power ratio in all of the classes, probably does the best job of it actually in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. The Wizard can be more rewarding, but it does take more work. Either way, if pure magic is what you are after, both of these classes will serve you well. Well, what about you, adventurers? What do you prefer, the Sorcerer or the Wizard? Let's talk about it in the comments. And until then, remember that if the Wizard makes fun of the Sorcerer in any way, it's probably just because they're jealous.